Picture this, if you will. A frozen morning in 9th century Sweden where the mist hangs thick as wool between the towering pines. Young Bjorn crouches behind a massive boulder, his breath forming small clouds that might as well be smoke signals to any seasoned hunter. But this boy isn't watching for deer or elk. No, he's watching his father Einar charge through the forest like Thor himself, war cry echoing off the trees as he leads 20 Viking warriors in what they call a winter raid. And here's where our story takes its first dark turn. 3 Saxon arrows find their mark, drawn like magnets to that bellowing war cry. Einar the Loud, as the clan will remember him, becomes Einar the Silent in the space of 3 heartbeats. Young Bjorn watches his father's body crumple into the snow, steam rising from wounds that will never heal, and learns the most important lesson of his life: the loudest warriors die first. Now, you have to understand the world Bjorn was born into. This isn't the romantic Viking age of Hollywood movies. This is the grinding reality of 9th century Scandinavia, where population pressure means every valley holds too many mouths and too little food. The forests that once teemed with game now echo mostly empty. Deer populations that sustained earlier generations have been hunted to near extinction. It's like trying to feed modern New York City with the deer from Central Park. The math simply doesn't work. Bjorn's family represents this perfect storm of Viking circumstance. His grandmother, old Sigrid, carries the ancient Seidra wisdom, that mystical knowledge about moving between worlds, reading signs in smoke, and understanding the hidden currents of nature. Think of her as part shaman, part survival expert, part weather forecaster, all rolled into one wrinkled package, who speaks in riddles that somehow always prove true. On the other side, his grandfather Magnus brings the calculating mind of a merchant. Where other Vikings see only honor and glory, Magnus sees profit margins and resource management. He's the kind of man who can look at a raid and calculate not just the potential plunder, but the cost in men, ships, and seasonal timing. It's this combination, mystical wisdom and cold calculation, that swirls together in young Bjorn's developing mind. But it's hunger that becomes his greatest teacher. The winter of 847 hits Sweden like a giant's fist. Imagine the worst blizzard you've ever experienced, then multiply it by 3 months of unrelenting cold, where the snow piles higher than a man's head and the wind cuts through the best furs like they're made of spider silk. The clan's food stores run so low that even the children stop asking for second helpings. It's during this desperate time that Bjorn makes his first revolutionary discovery. While the other hunters crash through the forest in traditional Viking fashion, all strength and sound and fury, Bjorn starts watching the wolves. For 3 entire days, he follows a pack at a distance, learning to read their silent language of gesture and posture. These aren't the romantic wolves of fairy tales. These are lean, efficient killing machines that communicate through the twitch of an ear, the angle of a tail, the direction of a gaze. Think about what this means. In a culture that values loudness as strength, where warriors prove their worth through battle cries and bold charges, here's a teenage boy studying predators that succeed through silence. It's like a future Navy SEAL studying tiger sharks, recognizing that true efficiency comes not from announcing your presence, but from perfecting your approach. Desperation drives innovation. With his family facing starvation, Bjorn wraps his boots in rabbit fur to muffle his footsteps. He learns to control his breathing, matching the rhythm of wind through pine branches. Most remarkably, he discovers the art of patience that would make a Zen master proud. 6 hours. 6 full hours lying motionless in snow that would freeze a normal person solid, waiting for the perfect moment. And when that moment comes, when the massive elk finally steps into range, Bjorn doesn't charge. He doesn't shout. He simply rises like morning mist and strikes with the precision of a surgeon. The successful kill that saves his family becomes more than just meat for the winter. It becomes proof that patience conquers strength, that silence defeats sound, that thinking like prey allows you to move like mist. But revolutions always face resistance. At the spring gathering, when the snows finally melt and the clans come together to share stories of the winter's survival, the traditional hunters mock Bjorn's methods. They call him coward, rabbit heart, someone who dishonors the Viking way. Picture the scene. Grizzled warriors with scars like battle maps across their faces, drinking fermented honey wine and laughing at this young man who talks about studying wolves instead of fighting like one. Enter Tormund, the clan elder whose beard has gone white from 40 winters of watching young warriors live and die. Tormund has the kind of wisdom that comes from seeing too many loud heroes buried under silent snow. He looks at the mockers, then at Bjorn, and proposes something that will change Viking hunting forever. A contest. Bjorn's silence against their strength, his patience against their fury, his revolutionary methods against 1,200 years of Viking tradition. The stakes couldn't be higher. This isn't just about proving hunting techniques. This is about challenging the fundamental Viking belief that strength and loudness equal survival. It's about testing whether the old ways, the ways that got his father killed, are truly the best ways. As the crowd gathers and the terms are set, you can feel the weight of history shifting. Because sometimes, the future of warfare hangs not on the clash of swords, but on the silence between heartbeats. And, in that silence, listening to the whisper of wind through pine needles and the distant call of ravens who have seen too much Viking blood spilled, Bjorn prepares to prove that the most dangerous hunters are the ones you never hear coming. The hunting contest of 848 becomes the stuff of legend before it even begins. Picture the scene. Dawn breaking over the Swedish highlands like molten copper, and 13 hunters standing at the forest edge. 12 follow the old ways, massive men with axes gleaming, leather creaking, voices already raised in preliminary boasts about the elk they'll drag back by sunset. They look exactly like what central casting would order for Viking warriors. And then there's Bjorn, silent as morning mist, carrying equipment that makes the traditional hunters shake their heads in disgust. While they sport iron-tipped spears and heavy hunting axes, Bjorn carries what looks like a medicine pouch filled with crushed pine needles. The other hunters don't understand they're witnessing the birth of psychological warfare. The first Viking to understand that scent control matters more than weapon weight. When Tormund gives the signal, 12 warriors crash into the forest like a rock slide. You can hear them coming from a mile away, boots snapping branches, voices calling to each other, the metallic ring of weapons hitting stone. It's hunting as performance art, where showing your strength matters as much as the actual kill. These men hunt the way their fathers and grandfathers hunted, the way Vikings have always hunted. Bjorn disappears. Not gradually, not slowly, he simply vanishes like smoke in wind. His revolutionary technique involves rubbing those crushed pine needles into his clothes until he smells like the forest itself. Think about the genius of this. While other hunters mask their scent with animal fat or ignore it entirely, Bjorn becomes chemically invisible to his prey. He's not just hunting deer, he's thinking like deer. But scent control is just the beginning. Bjorn has learned to move only when wind masks the subtle sounds of his passage. When a breeze picks up, rustling the pine needles overhead, that's when he takes his steps. When the wind dies, he freezes completely, becoming part of the landscape. It's like watching a ghost hunt, present but invisible, moving but never detected. By sunset, the results speak louder than any war cry. 12 traditional hunters return empty-handed, faces flushed with exertion and embarrassment. They've spent the day chasing shadows and echoes, their loud approach driving every animal within miles deeper into the forest. Meanwhile, Bjorn emerges from the tree line like a spirit made flesh, dragging not 1, not 2, but 3 deer behind him. The crowd gathered at the forest edge falls silent in a way that has nothing to do with reverence and everything to do with shock. Among the witnesses stands Jarl Magnus the Bold, a man whose reputation for courage borders on recklessness. Magnus has led Viking raids from Dublin to Constantinople, earned his wealth through strength of arm and loudness of voice. He represents everything traditional about Viking culture, the belief that success comes through direct confrontation, that honor lies in open battle, that real warriors announce their presence with pride. Initially, Magnus scorns these new methods as cowardly, unworthy of true Viking blood. But cowardice doesn't explain 3 deer when 12 brave men caught nothing. Cowardice doesn't explain the growing whispers among his own warriors, men who are starting to wonder if there might be wisdom in this madness. And cowardice certainly doesn't explain what happens 3 nights later. Magnus maintains the most heavily guarded hall in the region. We're talking about a fortress mentality here. Think of a medieval pentagon crossed with a private club for paranoid warlords. Guards at every entrance, sentries on the walls, even trusted men sleeping across the doorways. No one enters Magnus's hall without his knowledge and permission. No one. Until Bjorn decides to prove a point. Using techniques developed for hunting elk, he infiltrates the hall like morning fog seeping through cracks, past the outer sentries who never hear his approach. Over walls that might as well be suggestions, through corridors where guards stand at attention, looking outward for threats that could come crashing through doors, never suspecting danger might whisper past them like a breeze. Magnus wakes to find a fresh wolf pelt draped across his throne. The throne he fell asleep guarding, surrounded by his most trusted men. Attached to the pelt, a note written in precise runic script. Strength shouts, wisdom whispers. The message hits like a psychological sledgehammer. If Bjorn can place a gift on Magnus's throne, he could just as easily have placed a blade across Magnus's throat. The partnership that follows transforms more than just hunting. It revolutionizes Viking warfare itself. Magnus provides resources, political protection, and access to the finest warriors in the region. Bjorn provides something far more valuable, a completely new way of thinking about conflict. Together, they establish the first Forest Whisperer Academy, a training ground where selected warriors learn to move like smoke through enemy territory. But even revolutionary partnerships need the right foundation. Bjorn's marriage to Ingrid, the Master Weaver, proves that behind every great silent warrior stands an equally innovative woman. Ingrid doesn't just make clothes. She engineers stealth technology. Using layered wool and specially treated leather, she creates garments that eliminate the rustle of movement, the squeak of leather, even the whisper of fabric against fabric. Think about the medieval equivalent of developing Kevlar in your basement. Ingrid experiments with different weaving techniques, tests various leather treatments, even incorporates moss and natural fibers to create clothing that functions like wearable camouflage. Her breakthrough designs allow warriors to move through forests without the telltale sounds that traditionally announce human presence. The Academy's first graduating class consists of 20 carefully selected warriors who represent the best combination of physical ability and mental discipline. These aren't just strong men taught to be quiet. They're psychological revolutionaries trained to think like their prey, move like their environment, and strike like natural disasters that give no warning before they devastate everything in their path. Their first real test comes at the Battle of Silent Ridge, where these 20 shadow hunters prove their worth by scouting Saxon positions before the main engagement. While the enemy prepares for a traditional Viking assault, all fury and noise and straightforward charge, Bjorn's graduates map every defensive position, count every warrior, identify every weakness without being detected. The result is military poetry, written in blood and snow. 500 Vikings defeat 3,000 Franks because foreknowledge trumps force every time. When you know exactly where your enemies are sleeping, exactly which guards change when, exactly where their supplies are stored, you don't need superior numbers. You need superior timing. The victory sends shockwaves through the military establishments of medieval Europe. Word travels fast in the interconnected world of Viking politics. King Halfdan of Norway, planning his Irish campaigns, sends messengers requesting Bjorn's hunters for reconnaissance work. This isn't just local recognition. This is international validation that silent warfare has become the new standard for military excellence. The techniques that started with one hungry boy watching wolves are now spreading across the entire Norse world like wildfire through dry grass. But success breeds its own dangers. As Bjorn's reputation grows and his methods spread, traditional warriors face an uncomfortable truth. The old ways of strength and sound are becoming obsolete. The very foundation of Viking masculine identity, the idea that real warriors fight openly and loudly, is cracking under the pressure of undeniable results. Revolution always threatens those who built their power on the old system, and in the shadows of success, jealousy begins to sharpen its knives. preparing for the betrayal that will test whether Bjorn's teachings can protect their creator when the hunters become the hunted. By 855, something unprecedented has happened in the Viking world. Bjorn's network of trained hunters has created an intelligence web that stretches from the ice fields of Iceland to the river trading posts of Russia. Think about the scale we're talking about here. This is like building the medieval equivalent of the CIA, but instead of technology and bureaucracy, it's built on silence and patience, and an almost supernatural ability to gather information without being detected. The transformation goes far beyond military applications. Traditional Viking tactical doctrine, built around the berserker charge and overwhelming force, gives way to something far more sophisticated. Silent scouts replace the old method of simply crashing into enemy territory and hoping superior fury carries the day. It's the difference between a sledgehammer and a surgeon's scalpel. Both can be deadly, but one requires infinitely more skill and produces far better results. But perhaps the most dramatic change comes in the economic realm. Silent hunting techniques triple food yields across Scandinavia, when you can approach game without alerting it, when you understand animal behavior patterns, when you can predict rather than simply react. Hunting transforms from desperate chance-taking to reliable resource management. Imagine the impact. Families that once faced starvation during harsh winters now have surplus meat to trade. This economic revolution frees up warriors for expansion in ways previous generations couldn't imagine. When you don't need every able-bodied man desperately hunting just to survive the winter, you can afford to send more men on trading expeditions, raids, and settlement missions. The surplus furs from successful hunts fund better weapons, stronger ships, improved equipment. It's a positive feedback loop that amplifies Viking power across northern Europe. Recognizing the need to preserve and transmit this knowledge, Bjorn creates something remarkable: the Whisperer's Codex. Written in runic cipher to protect its secrets from enemies, this manuscript represents the first systematic manual of stealth warfare and silent hunting. Think of it as the medieval equivalent of a special forces training manual, covering everything from basic fieldcraft to advanced psychological techniques. The Codex details 27 hand signals that allow silent communication across distances where whispered words might carry to enemy ears. 15 different breathing patterns, each designed for specific situations, from the shallow, controlled breathing used during stalking to the deep, rhythmic patterns that calm nerves before a crucial strike. Most importantly, it codifies the mental discipline Bjorn calls thinking like prey, moving like mist. This psychological framework represents a complete inversion of traditional Viking mentality. Instead of thinking like a predator, strong, loud, aggressive, Bjorn teaches his students to understand the prey's perspective. How does a deer detect danger? What makes an elk bolt in terror? When you can think like the hunted, you become the perfect hunter. When you can move like mist, present but intangible, visible but untouchable, you become nearly impossible to counter. Among Bjorn's students, one stands out for reasons that initially seem to disqualify her entirely. Astrid Ravenquiet is a girl rejected by traditional warrior society for her small stature and quiet nature. In a culture that values size and strength above almost everything else, Astrid represents everything Vikings typically dismiss. But Bjorn sees what others miss. Sometimes the greatest revolutions come from those who were never allowed to participate in the old system. Astrid doesn't just master Bjorn's techniques, she transcends them, developing innovations that even her teacher hasn't imagined. Her breakthrough involves using controlled snowfalls to mask approach sounds, timing her movements to coincide with natural weather patterns that provide auditory camouflage. It's like learning to hunt during thunderstorms, using nature's own noise to cover the subtle sounds of human presence. But her real genius lies in understanding that stealth isn't just about avoiding detection, it's about controlling perception itself. Astrid learns to use shadows and light patterns to become practically invisible, even in open terrain. She discovers that small movements can be more effective than complete stillness, that sometimes the best hiding place is in plain sight when you understand how human attention actually works. Yet success breeds enemies, and Bjorn's growing influence threatens established power structures throughout the region. Enter Jarl Gottfried, a man whose authority rests entirely on the old ways of doing things. Gottfried represents the traditional Viking elite, men who earned their positions through strength of arm and loudness of voice, who built their reputations on the very methods Bjorn's revolution is making obsolete. Fear motivates Gottfried more than jealousy. If silent warfare becomes the new standard, what happens to Jarls whose only qualification is their ability to lead traditional charges? If stealth and intelligence matter more than brute force, how long before warriors start questioning why they follow leaders who can't adapt to changing realities? Gottfried sees his entire world crumbling and decides that eliminating Bjorn will restore the natural order. The betrayal comes during the sacred gathering at Uppsala Temple, where representatives from across Scandinavia come to honor the gods and conduct the most important business of the Viking world. It's supposed to be neutral ground, protected by ancient laws and divine oversight. But Gottfried orchestrates something unprecedented. An ambush using Bjorn's own students turned traitor through a combination of gold, threats, and appeals to traditional Viking values. Picture the psychological impact. Techniques developed for hunting animals and scouting enemies suddenly turned against their creator. Students who learn to move like smoke and strike like lightning, now hunting their own teacher through the sacred groves surrounding Uppsala. It's the ultimate test of whether Bjorn's methods can protect him when the hunters become the hunted, when the prey fights back with skills learned from the predator himself. The irony is almost poetic. Gottfried believes he's arranged the perfect trap, using Bjorn's own techniques against him, but he fundamentally misunderstands what he's dealing with. These aren't just hunting methods. They're a complete philosophy of survival that treats every situation as a potential ambush, every gathering as a possible trap, every moment of visibility as a moment of vulnerability. When the attack comes, Bjorn demonstrates the ultimate expression of his teachings. Using skills meant for animals against humans, he doesn't fight the ambush. He dissolves into it, like morning mist touched by sunlight. Traditional warriors think in terms of standing and fighting, of meeting force with greater force. Bjorn thinks in terms of not being there when the force arrives. He vanishes into forests where no traditional warrior can follow, becoming a ghost story that his pursuers tell around campfires. The student has become something beyond a master. He's become a living legend whose mere survival proves that his methods work even against those trained in his own techniques. But this escape marks more than just personal survival. It begins Bjorn's transformation from teacher to myth, from historical figure to something approaching the supernatural. As he disappears into the deep forests, leaving behind only whispered stories of impossible escapes and supernatural evasion, Bjorn begins the final phase of his journey. The man who revolutionized hunting and warfare is about to discover that the greatest prey of all has been waiting for him in the deepest, most silent places of the Swedish wilderness. The White Hart calls to him across the years, and legends have a way of calling to those who are ready to become legends themselves. Bjorn's final decade transforms him from teacher to something approaching mythology, operating from hidden forest sanctuaries that exist somewhere between the physical and spiritual worlds. He pursues the ultimate expression of silent hunting, the legendary White Hart that no hunter has glimpsed for generations. This isn't just any deer we're talking about. In Norse tradition, the White Hart represents the boundary between worlds, the living symbol of nature's deepest mysteries. Think about what this means. Here's a man who revolutionized warfare and hunting, who built an intelligence network spanning continents, who survived betrayal by his own students, now dedicating himself to pursuing something that might not even exist in the physical world. It's like Einstein spending his final years searching for unicorns. Except in Bjorn's case, the search itself becomes a form of spiritual practice that elevates silent hunting to an art form. During these years, Bjorn develops the philosophical framework that will outlive even his legendary techniques. He begins to view silence not as the absence of sound, but as the presence of perfect harmony. This isn't just semantic wordplay. It's a fundamental shift in understanding that transforms stealth from a mere technique into a way of being. When you achieve perfect harmony with your environment, detection becomes impossible because you're no longer separate from what surrounds you. From his forest sanctuaries, Bjorn continues training select students who seek him out like pilgrims pursuing enlightenment. But these aren't the mass graduation ceremonies of his academy days. These are individual teachings, customized for students who have already mastered the basics and now seek something deeper. Think of it as the difference between public university classes and private tutorials, with a Nobel laureate, the same subject matter, but infinitely more refined. Meanwhile, the international impact of his methods becomes impossible to ignore. Viking settlements from the ice-locked fjords of Greenland to the cosmopolitan trading centers of Constantinople report dramatically increased survival rates. When you can hunt silently and efficiently, when you can gather intelligence without detection, when you can move through hostile territory like smoke through air, your chances of surviving in a dangerous world improve exponentially. The economic implications ripple across the medieval world. Silent hunting techniques don't just feed families. They create surplus that funds exploration, trade, and cultural development. Modified versions of Bjorn's methods create new possibilities for diplomatic negotiations, where information gathering becomes more valuable than military force. It's the beginning of what we might recognize as modern intelligence work, but built on forest craft rather than technology. Trade negotiations transform when one party can gather information about the other's true position without being detected. Imagine the advantage of knowing exactly what your trading partner's bottom line is, what pressures they're facing, what alternatives they're considering. Bjorn's techniques, originally developed for hunting elk, now influence merchant dealings from Norway to Novgorod. But it's Bjorn's death in 870 that truly cements his transformation from historical figure to legend. The circumstances are as mysterious and fitting as everything else about his later life. According to the accounts that survive, he finally encounters the White Hart during what he somehow knows will be his final hunt. Picture the scene. Deep in the Swedish wilderness, in a grove so remote that sunlight filters through ancient pines like cathedral light through stained glass. Bjorn, now an old man whose beard has gone white as winter snow, finally comes face to face with the creature he's pursued for years. And in that moment of ultimate success, he makes a choice that defines everything he's become. Instead of taking the shot, instead of claiming the ultimate trophy, he chooses observation over possession. He kneels in prayer, watching this magnificent creature that represents everything pure and untouchable about the natural world. And there, in perfect silence, in perfect harmony with the forest around him, Bjorn's heart simply stops. Death comes to him as quietly as he moved through life, without announcement or drama, as natural as snowfall in winter. It's a death that becomes legend before his body grows cold. His funeral procession creates something unprecedented in Viking culture. Over 1,000 hunters, warriors, and students walk in absolute silence through 20 miles of forest, from his death site to the sacred burial ground. This isn't just mourning. It's a moving meditation that transforms grief into spiritual practice. Imagine the psychological impact. 1,000 people moving through the wilderness without making a sound, creating a river of humanity that flows like water between the trees. The silence itself becomes a form of prayer, a final tribute to the man who proved that the most powerful warriors are often the ones you never hear coming. Stories of this procession spread across Scandinavia and beyond, entering Norse mythology as an example of how death, like life, can be faced with dignity and grace when you understand the deeper rhythms of the natural world. After Bjorn's death, the Whisperer tradition explodes across Scandinavia through hidden schools and guild systems that operate more like secret societies than traditional training academies. These aren't public institutions. They're networks of knowledge that pass from master to student in forest clearings and mountain caves, preserving techniques that give their practitioners enormous advantages in an increasingly competitive world. The transformation of Viking culture becomes permanent and profound. The old model of strength and loudness doesn't disappear entirely, but it's supplemented by something far more sophisticated. Vikings learn to interact with both nature and enemies in ways their ancestors never imagined. Successful raids now depend as much on intelligence gathering as on battle fury. Successful settlements require understanding local ecosystems rather than simply overwhelming them. Modern archaeological discoveries continue to confirm that these legends rest on revolutionary reality. Excavations across Scandinavia uncover specialized equipment that makes no sense until you understand silent hunting techniques. Specially designed arrowheads for minimum noise, clothing constructed to eliminate rustle, even architectural features in longhouses that suggest widespread adoption of stealth principles in daily life. Perhaps most remarkably, genetic studies suggest that Bjorn's descendants, both biological and intellectual, survived and thrived throughout the medieval period and beyond. The skills he developed for hunting animals and gathering intelligence proved adaptable to every challenge the changing world could offer. When the Viking Age ended, the whisperer traditions evolved into other forms: forest guides, master hunters, military scouts, even early forms of diplomatic intelligence work. Today, when modern special forces train in fieldcraft and stealth techniques, when wildlife photographers learn to approach animals without disturbing them, when anthropologists study hunter-gatherer societies to understand sustainable resource management, their walking paths first mapped by a hungry Viking boy who learned to think like prey and move like mist. The lesson of Bjorn's life resonates across centuries. Sometimes the greatest revolutions come not from those who shout the loudest, but from those who understand the power of perfect silence. In a world that increasingly values noise over wisdom, force over finesse, his legacy reminds us that the most powerful hunters are still the ones you never hear coming. And in the deep forests of Sweden, on mornings when the mist hangs thick between ancient pines, some say you can still glimpse a white hart moving like a ghost between the trees, carrying the spirit of the man who chose to watch rather than possess, to understand rather than conquer, to whisper rather than shout his way into immortality.